18-year-old Jake Morrison stood outside the gates of the Midwest livestock auction in rural Kansas, clutching a worn leather envelope that his grandfather, Sergeant First Class William Bull Morrison, had left him with strict instructions not to open until after the funeral. Inside that envelope was $47,000 in cash, a faded photograph, and a handwritten note that had sent Jake on the most mysterious mission of his young life. The note was brief but clear. Jake, go to the Kansas livestock auction on September 15th. Find lot number 347, a Black Angus bull named Thunder. Buy him no matter the cost. Bring him to the address on the back of this photo. Trust me, grandson, this is the most important thing you'll ever do. Grandpa Bull. Jake had been raised by his grandfather since he was 8 years old, after his parents died in a car accident. Sergeant Morrison had been a decorated Vietnam veteran who rarely spoke about his military service, but who had taught Jake everything about honor, duty, and keeping promises. Even though this request seemed bizarre, Jake knew he had to honor his grandfather's final wishes. Standing among the cattle ranchers, farmers, and livestock dealers who filled the auction yard, Jake felt completely out of place. At 18, with his city clothes and obvious inexperience, he drew curious stares from the weathered men who made their living buying and selling cattle. But Jake had made a promise to the man who had sacrificed everything to raise him, and nothing was going to stop him from keeping it. "First time at an auction, son?" asked a friendly voice behind him. Jake turned to see an elderly man in a cowboy hat and worn denim jacket, his face showing the kind of deep lines that came from decades of working outdoors. "Yes, sir," Jake replied honestly. "I'm looking for a specific bull, lot number 347, named Thunder." The old rancher's expression changed immediately, his eyes widening with surprise and something that looked like respect. "Thunder? Boy, that's one special animal. Been hearing stories about that bull for years. You got serious money to bid on him?" Jake patted the envelope in his jacket pocket. "Enough, I hope. Can you tell me about him?" "Thunder's been owned by the Jackson family for 15 years, and the rancher explained. But old Tom Jackson passed last month, and his kids are selling off the herd. That bull's got a reputation, though. Stories say he's got an almost supernatural connection to military folks. Tom always claimed Thunder could sense PTSD and depression in veterans better than any doctor." Jake's heart skipped a beat. His grandfather had suffered from severe PTSD after Vietnam, nightmares and flashbacks that had haunted him for decades. Could there be a connection between Thunder and his grandfather's military service? "Why would a bull be connected to veterans?" Jake asked, trying to keep his voice casual. The rancher looked around to make sure no one else was listening, then leaned closer. "Tom Jackson used to run an informal therapy program on his ranch. Veterans who were struggling would come out and work with Thunder. Something about that bull could calm the most troubled minds. Tom never advertised it, but word spread through the veteran community. Hundreds of soldiers found peace working with Thunder over the years." As they talked, Jake noticed a group of men in military dress uniforms standing near the auction ring. They were clearly veterans from different eras. Some wore Vietnam-era ribbons, others displayed medals from Iraq and Afghanistan. All of them seemed to be watching lot number 347 with intense interest. "Looks like I'm not the only one interested in Thunder," Jake observed. "Those men have been coming here for days," the rancher said quietly. "Ever since word got out that Thunder was going up for auction, some of them traveled from 3 states away. That bull means something powerful to the veteran community, son. You sure you want to get into a bidding war with men who've sacrificed everything for this country?" Jake thought about his grandfather's final request, about the urgency in the note, and about the fact that Sergeant Morrison had saved $47,000 for this specific purpose. Whatever Thunder meant to those veterans, he meant something even more important to Jake's grandfather. "Sir," Jake said with determination that surprised even himself, "my grandfather was Sergeant First Class William Morrison, Vietnam veteran. He left me specific instructions to buy Thunder, and I'm going to honor those instructions no matter what it takes." The rancher's expression shifted to one of deep respect. "Morrison, I heard that name before. Tom Jackson used to mention a sergeant who helped him set up the therapy program years ago. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Before Jake could answer, the auctioneer's voice boomed across the yard. Lot number 347, Black Angus bull, Thunder, 15 years old, proven therapy animal. Opening bid starts at $5,000. Jake's heart raced as he realized that in a few minutes, he would learn whether his grandfather's mysterious final mission was about to succeed or fail. Looking at the determined faces of the veterans around the auction ring, Jake understood that he wasn't just bidding on a bull, he was bidding on a piece of military history that somehow connected to his grandfather's deepest secrets. Have you ever inherited a mission that seemed impossible until you realized it was connected to something much larger and more important than you ever imagined? The bidding started fast and intense, with the veterans who had traveled from across the country immediately driving the price well beyond what a typical livestock auction would see. Jake watched in amazement as the amount climbed quickly. $8,000, $12,000, $15,000 with no sign of slowing down. Each bid came from men whose military bearing and determined expressions showed they understood Thunder's true value, far beyond his worth as breeding stock. 22,000, called out a decorated Marine veteran, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. 25,000, countered an Army colonel, still serving based on his crisp uniform and confident posture. Jake realized he was witnessing something extraordinary. These weren't casual bids from ranchers looking for good breeding stock. These were passionate attempts by military men to preserve something sacred to their community. As the bidding approached $30,000, Jake began to understand the magnitude of what his grandfather had asked him to do. 32,000, shouted a Navy veteran whose prosthetic leg didn't slow his aggressive bidding stance. Jake's hand trembled as he raised his paddle. 35,000. The entire auction yard fell silent as every head turned to look at the young man who had just entered the high-stakes bidding war. The veterans studied Jake with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Who was this kid, and what right did he have to compete for their treasured thunder? Colonel James Mitchell, a distinguished officer with silver hair and a chest full of medals, approached Jake during a brief pause in the bidding. "Son, I don't know who you are or why you're here, but Thunder belongs with the veteran community. That bull has provided healing for hundreds of soldiers over the years. Step aside and let us handle this." Jake met the colonel's intimidating stare with quiet determination. "Sir, with all due respect, my grandfather was Sergeant First Class William Morrison, Vietnam veteran. He left me specific instructions to purchase Thunder, and I intend to honor those instructions." Colonel Mitchell's expression changed instantly. "Morrison? Sergeant William Morrison? The one they called Bull Morrison?" "Yes, sir. That was my grandfather." The colonel's entire demeanor shifted from hostility to amazement. "Son, your grandfather is a legend in our community. He's the one who discovered Thunder's healing abilities and helped Tom Jackson develop the therapy program. Bull Morrison saved more veteran lives through that program than most people save in a lifetime." Before Jake could process this revelation, the auctioneer resumed the bidding. "I have 35,000. Do I hear 38? 40,000, called the Marine veteran, determined not to be outbid by a teenager. Jake's mind raced. His grandfather had saved exactly $47,000, which suggested he knew approximately how much Thunder would cost. But hearing that his grandfather was instrumental in creating the therapy program added a whole new dimension to the mystery. 43,000, Jake called out, his voice stronger now that he understood he wasn't competing against the veteran community. He was continuing his grandfather's work with them. The Marine veteran looked at his companions, clearly struggling with the decision to bid higher. These men had pooled their resources to purchase Thunder, but they were approaching their limit. Colonel Mitchell walked over to the group and spoke quietly with them, sharing what he had learned about Jake's connection to Bull Morrison. 45,000, came a new voice from the back of the crowd. Everyone turned to see an elderly man in a wheelchair, his military decorations identifying him as a highly decorated Vietnam veteran. "I've been saving my disability benefits for 3 years to make sure Thunder stays in good hands." Jake felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on him. These men were sacrificing their own money, their savings, their disability benefits to preserve something his grandfather had helped create. But his grandfather's note had been clear. Buy Thunder, no matter the cost. 47,000, Jake called out, knowing he was betting everything his grandfather had left him. The auction yard fell completely silent. The elderly veteran in the wheelchair looked at Jake with a mixture of respect and resignation, understanding that he had been outbid by someone who clearly had the same determination he did. 47,000 going once, going twice, the auctioneer called. In that moment of silence, Jake made a decision that would honor both his grandfather's wishes and the veteran community that had supported Thunder's mission for so many years. "Wait," Jake called out, his voice carrying across the silent auction yard. "Before you close the bidding, I need to say something." Jake walked to the center of the auction ring, feeling every eye in the place focused on him. "My grandfather, Sergeant Bull Morrison, left me money to buy Thunder and instructions to take him to a specific address. But I just learned that Thunder's therapy program was my grandfather's idea, his legacy to help veterans who were struggling like he was." Jake pulled out his grandfather's note and read it aloud. "This is the most important thing you'll ever do." He looked up at the gathered veterans. "I think my grandfather knew that the most important thing wouldn't be buying Thunder. It would be making sure Thunder continues helping veterans for years to come." The tension in the air was palpable as everyone waited to hear what Jake would say next. "I'm withdrawing my bid," Jake announced, "but I want to make a proposal to whoever buys Thunder. My grandfather left me $47,000 for this purpose. I want to donate that money to help establish a permanent home for Thunder's therapy program in memory of Sergeant Bull Morrison." The emotional response was immediate and overwhelming. Veterans who had been glaring at Jake moments before now looked at him with tears in their eyes. Colonel Mitchell stepped forward and extended his hand to Jake with obvious respect. "Son, your grandfather would be proud. You just proved that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Have you ever discovered that the right thing to do wasn't what you originally planned, but something even more meaningful that honored the true spirit of someone's wishes?" The aftermath of Jake's announcement transformed the entire atmosphere of the auction. What had been a competitive bidding war between strangers became an emotional gathering of veterans united by their shared connection to Thunder and their newfound respect for Bull Morrison's grandson. The elderly veteran in the wheelchair, Master Sergeant Robert Chen, wheeled himself over to Jake with tears streaming down his weathered face. "Son," Master Sergeant Chen said, his voice thick with emotion, "your grandfather saved my life in 1987. I was ready to eat my gun, couldn't handle the nightmares anymore. Bull Morrison brought me to meet Thunder when the program was just getting started. That bull somehow knew exactly what I needed. Just stood there calm and solid while I broke down and finally let 15 years of pain come out." Colonel Mitchell organized an impromptu meeting right there in the auction yard, with Jake at the center of a circle of veterans sharing stories about Bull Morrison and Thunder. Each story revealed more about his grandfather's hidden life as a healer who had dedicated his post-war years to helping other veterans find peace. "Your grandfather never talked about what he did in Vietnam," explained Captain Maria Santos, a Desert Storm veteran. "But he understood trauma in a way that most people never could. He saw how Thunder responded to emotional pain, and he convinced Tom Jackson to let veterans work with the bull. Over the years, hundreds of us found healing through that program." Jake listened in amazement as story after story emerged about his grandfather's quiet heroism. Veterans spoke of midnight phone calls when Bull Morrison talked them through suicidal thoughts, of weekend trips to the Jackson Ranch, where Thunder provided the non-judgmental presence they needed to begin healing, and of Bull Morrison personally driving struggling veterans to therapy appointments in VA hospitals. "Why didn't he ever tell me any of this?" Jake asked, overwhelmed by learning about this secret side of his grandfather's life. If this incredible story of military honor and healing has moved you, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Stories like these remind us that heroes often work in silence to help others. Colonel Mitchell pulled out a photograph that made Jake's heart stop. It showed a much younger Bull Morrison standing beside Thunder, but the man in the photo was smiling, something Jake had rarely seen his grandfather do in real life. "Your grandfather carried a lot of guilt about surviving when others didn't," the colonel explained. "Helping other veterans heal was his way of making sense of why he made it home when his buddies didn't." The auction resumed, but with a completely different energy. The veterans pooled their resources and purchased Thunder for $31,000, with Jake's $47,000 donation ensuring that Thunder would have a permanent, well-funded home for his therapy work. But more importantly, they decided to establish the program at the address Jake's grandfather had written on the back of the photograph. When Jake looked at the address for the first time, he was shocked to discover it was a 40-acre plot of land in Colorado that his grandfather had purchased 5 years earlier, but never told anyone about. The deed was in Jake's name, with a note indicating it was intended as a permanent home for Thunder's therapy program. Your grandfather was planning this for years, Master Sergeant Chen realized. He knew Thunder would outlive Tom Jackson, and he wanted to make sure the therapy program would survive. That's why he saved $47,000, not just to buy Thunder, but to establish a permanent facility. The revelation that his grandfather had been planning this elaborate legacy for years brought Jake to tears. Bull Morrison had spent the last years of his life quietly arranging for Thunder's therapy work to continue, ensuring that future generations of veterans would have access to the healing that had meant so much to his generation. Dr. Patricia Williams, a psychiatrist who had studied Thunder's therapy work for her research on animal-assisted treatment for PTSD, explained the significance of what Jake's grandfather had accomplished. Thunder represents one of the most successful informal therapy programs in military history. Veterans who worked with him showed measurable improvement in PTSD symptoms, depression, and suicidal ideation. Your grandfather essentially pioneered a treatment method that's now being studied by medical schools across the country. As the group made plans to transport Thunder to his new permanent home in Colorado, Jake realized that his mysterious mission was really just the beginning. His grandfather hadn't just asked him to buy a bull. He had passed on the responsibility of continuing a healing mission that would help veterans for decades to come. That evening, as Jake stood beside Thunder for the first time, he felt an immediate understanding of what all those veterans had experienced. The massive bull radiated a calm, accepting presence that seemed to communicate without words. I understand your pain, and I'm here to help you carry it. Thunder, Jake whispered, stroking the bull's massive head. I think I finally understand what Grandpa wanted me to learn. It's not enough to honor the dead by remembering them. We have to honor them by continuing their work. Thunder made a low rumbling sound that somehow conveyed both agreement and approval, and Jake knew that his grandfather's mission was in exactly the right hands. Do you believe that some legacies are so important that they transcend death, creating ripple effects of healing that continue to help others long after the original healer is gone? 1 year after that life-changing auction, Jake Morrison stood on the porch of the beautiful facility that had been built on his grandfather's Colorado land, watching as a group of Iraq War veterans worked peacefully alongside Thunder in the therapy pasture. The Bull Morrison Veterans Healing Ranch had become everything his grandfather had envisioned and more, serving as a model for animal-assisted therapy programs across the country. Jake, now 19 and having taken a gap year from college to establish the ranch, had discovered that continuing his grandfather's work was more fulfilling than anything he had ever imagined. Working alongside Dr. Williams and a team of military psychologists, Jake had helped develop a comprehensive program that combined Thunder's natural healing abilities with professional counseling and peer support. The transformation in the veterans who came to the ranch was nothing short of miraculous. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, a triple amputee from Afghanistan, had arrived 6 months earlier in a wheelchair, consumed by depression and refusing to engage with traditional therapy. Now he was leading orientation sessions for new veterans, crediting Thunder with helping him rediscover his sense of purpose. Jake, Staff Sergeant Torres said as he approached the porch, we've got a new group arriving this afternoon. 5 Marines from the same unit, all struggling with survivor's guilt. Dr. Williams thinks Thunder's group therapy approach might be exactly what they need. Jake had learned that Thunder seemed to have an almost supernatural ability to bring veterans together, creating bonds between strangers who shared similar traumas. Veterans who arrived isolated and suspicious would find themselves opening up to both Thunder and each other in ways that amazed the professional staff. The ranch's success had attracted national attention, leading to a documentary film, congressional testimony about innovative PTSD treatments, and funding from the Department of Veterans Affairs to replicate the program at other locations. But for Jake, The most meaningful recognition had come from the veterans themselves. Master Sergeant Chen, who had become Jake's unofficial mentor in understanding military culture, shared the story that revealed the true scope of Bull Morrison's legacy. "Your grandfather started keeping records of every veteran who worked with Thunder," Chen explained, showing Jake a thick binder filled with names, photos, and updates. "Look at this." The binder contained documentation of over 400 veterans who had participated in Thunder's therapy program over 15 years. But more remarkably, it included follow-up information showing that suicide attempts among program participants dropped to nearly zero, employment rates improved dramatically, and family relationships were rebuilt. "Your grandfather wasn't just helping individual veterans," Dr. Williams explained during one of their weekly planning meetings. "He was preventing a cascade of secondary trauma. Every veteran who found healing through Thunder went home better equipped to be a spouse, parent, and community member. The ripple effects of this program have touched thousands of lives." The most powerful validation of Bull Morrison's vision came when the original group of veterans who had bid against Jake at the auction returned for the ranch's first anniversary celebration. They brought with them over 200 other veterans from across the country, all of whom had been helped by Thunder's program at various points in their recovery. Colonel Mitchell, who had become the ranch's board chairman, delivered a speech that brought tears to every eye present. "Bull Morrison understood something that took the rest of us years to learn," he said. "Healing isn't just about overcoming trauma. It's about transforming that trauma into something that can help others. Every veteran who finds peace here becomes equipped to help the next generation of warriors." The celebration's most emotional moment came when Jake unveiled a bronze statue of his grandfather standing beside Thunder with an inscription that read, "Sergeant First Class William Bull Morrison, who understood that true courage means continuing to fight for others long after the war is over." As Jake spoke at the dedication, he reflected on how completely his understanding of courage and legacy had changed. "A year ago, I thought my grandfather had given me a simple task: buy a bull at an auction. But he had actually given me something much more valuable: the opportunity to continue a mission of healing that will outlive all of us." Thunder, now 16 years old but still strong and vital, stood peacefully nearby as Jake spoke, surrounded by veterans who had found hope and healing through their connection with him. The bull's presence had become a symbol of resilience, proving that even the deepest wounds could heal when met with patience, understanding, and unconditional acceptance. Dr. Williams announced during the celebration that Thunder's therapy methods were being studied by veterinary schools and psychology programs across the globe, with similar programs being established in Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom. "Bull Morrison's vision has become an international movement," she said, "and it all started with one veteran's determination to help his fellow warriors find peace." As the celebration wound down and veterans shared final stories around a campfire, Jake sat beside Thunder under the Colorado stars, feeling his grandfather's presence more strongly than ever. The bull, who had somehow become both a symbol of healing and a bridge between past and present, rested his massive head against Jake's shoulder in a gesture that had become their nightly ritual. "Grandpa," Jake whispered into the night, "I finally understand what you meant when you said this would be the most important thing I'd ever do. You didn't just give me a mission, you gave me a purpose. And Thunder and I are going to make sure your work continues for as long as there are veterans who need healing." Thunder's gentle rumble seemed to carry the approval of every veteran who had ever found peace in his presence. And Jake knew that his grandfather's legacy was secure in hands that understood the true meaning of service, not just to country, but to the warriors who had given everything to protect it. Do you believe that the most profound acts of service often happen quietly, creating legacies of healing that ripple through generations and touch lives in ways the original servant never could have imagined?